And God, you even said Kelly's gonna take the lead, and I'm like, Jesus Christ. All right. And we probably just got the opener to the episode.
I always love to have a blooper.
Yeah. It hasn't been me 100% of the time, but it's been pretty close.
Hi, I'm Julia.
I'm Rachael.
And I'm Kelly.
And this is What You Should Read,
The podcast where we should all over our books.
And I just want to start by congratulating America on electing Joe Biden as our next president.
And Kamala Harris as our vice president.
Yes.
Yes.
It's very exciting. It's no secret on this podcast that we are pro Biden and Harris, and just very excited that this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so we're doing great today. Kelly, what are you reading this week?
Well, I just started the Book of Two Ways by Jodi Picoult, our book club book. So very excited. I like it a lot so far.
Awesome.
Great.
Rachael, what are you reading?
Well, I haven't finished anything that I was reading last week because I have almost read nothing all week.
Aw.
I've just been either working like crazy or watching the election results, and today I just felt kind of icky. So, but I did also start the Book of Two Ways because I was like, maybe if I pick up something like that I'm super excited about, it'll get me reading. And I read like a chapter, so it's pretty good. But I do love it. It hooked me right away, of course.
And they're long chapters, so you know it's not like a James Patterson chapter where you read like a page and a half.
Right.
It's been really hard to focus this week, so I don't blame you. I am reading The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And you know what? I'm enjoying it. I wasn't at first. I didn't like it in the beginning. I think what I feel about it is that I really like the story, but I'm not a huge fan of her writing style. But that's fine. Like, it's not bad. It's just maybe not my favorite type of writing. And I think in the beginning, I was a little bit just expecting it to be something else. But now that most of the book is about, you know, Hollywood style stories, that is interesting and like salacious. So, so it's a fun read. Yeah.
One of the things I liked most about it was that all of the movies she was in sounded absolutely amazing, and I wanted to watch all of them. But of course I can't because she's not real and neither are they.
Yeah. Yeah. It is cool how Taylor Jenkins Reid has kind of invented this Hollywood history that seems like it totally could have been, but wasn't.
Right.
Yeah. And I love the main love story. I do. That's a great. So I can't say anything about it because it would spoil.
So major departure for us. There is only one piece of book news this week. And it's a great one. It's actually Rachael sent this to us and it's fantastic. The Shaded Choice Awards. This is the inaugural year for it. Nominations are going on right now, but by the time this podcast drops, you'll be able to vote in the first round. And what it is it is an award for Black and other authors of color. And it sounds like this might have been created because a lot of the other awards maybe are not as diverse as we would hope they would be in the year 2020. And I know that without even necessarily trying all that hard, I have read a ton of amazing books by Black authors, and especially Black women authors. So you don't even have to try that hard. And the women who came up with it, Princess came up with it, and then her friends Jasmine and Ashley helped. And this is an amazing idea, and I hope this goes on forever.
Yes, I love how they were seeking nominations and then there will be a first round. It just seemed very democratic.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, usually when these things come out, like Goodreads, I guess they just pick the books that have the most ratings. I don't know. I actually don't know how they come up with that list. It's kind of shrouded in mystery. So I loved the whole setup of this too.
Yeah,
Same.
I agree.
Mhm.
I know for Goodreads, if there's a book that is not there that you think deserves to be there, you can write it in,
Oh,
and
good.
sometimes they will stay and go on to further rounds. But yeah, I think this is a much better way of doing it. And if you don't seek out nominations from the public, you should make it very clear how you're picking the books that you're picking.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
No prizes for guessing what one book I nominated. It was You Should See Me in a Crown.
Yeah.
Of course.
I think I nominated Black Sun and The Vanishing Half.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go back and do Transcendent Kingdom. But I was like, if I'm only going to do one, it's going to be You Should See Me in a Crown.
I mean, of course.
So Kelly, you mentioned earlier today that you have a very recent acquisition to talk about.
Yes. Well, first of all, I have been hitting everything so hard because apparently the best way for me to do self-care is to buy books that I may or may not read. So I got the new Marissa Meyer, Instant Karma, which is about, yes, a woman who gains the ability to basically mete out karma to anyone at any time. And I don't know how I can make that happen, but I would like to apply for that too. And then Pretty Little Wife by Darby Kane, which sounds amazing. It's a woman who may or may not have killed her husband and whose dead husband then somehow vanishes. But what I got today, about probably 3 hours ago, was the answer is Alex Trebek's memoir, because we found out today that he has died from pancreatic cancer. And I'm sure everybody listening to this has watched Jeopardy like a billion times, and I don't know what they're gonna do. I don't know what they should do, but I'm excited to spend some more time with Alex Trebek. And I saw on Twitter that his episodes are going to air through Christmas.
Oh.
And his last taping day was October 29th. So, yeah.
That's incredible that he was working up until so recently. He was that show. So I don't know how it's going to continue without him.
Same.
Yeah.
Oh.
I know. The only acceptable substitute would be Kenan Thompson doing real Black Jeopardy.
Oh, actually, yes. Let's make that happen.
I would find that acceptable. I know Ken Jennings has just started producing the show. I would not be against him taking over because I think he has the necessary gravitas, but also he would do a good job, but not like, I don't know. I don't want it to end, but I also don't want to see anyone but Alex Trebek doing it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think they're going to have to do some like real thinking about who should take the role. And maybe they can have a time where they have guest hosts, just trying people out and seeing if anything, rather than picking someone right away and just like being like, you're the next Alex Trebek forever. Give the audience some time to be like, oh, this is just a trial, and it's not, we're not replacing him yet. And then when they find the perfect person, yeah, so sad.
I like that idea.
Shall I show you what I've acquired?
Yes,
please.
Well, Kelly brought this book over to my house yesterday because we did a campfire outside. It's called Sanctuary by V.B. James. But Kelly said, quote, when she was almost done reading it, shit's getting real. So do you want to borrow this? I said, yes.
Sure. Nice.
So that'll be cool. And then I got my book of the month box. I really need to go on a book buying ban like you, Rachael, because I'm out of control. We put up a new entertainment. Well, Dorian put up a new entertainment unit for our new TV. But I did like take all of my books off the bookshelf that was in that place. And I just like put them on the couch, and there were so many. And I just was like, I don't have a problem with books. It's like, yes, you do. But the entertainment center has a lot of bookshelves. So we just put them back on. But anyway, I got 3 books. I got White Ivy by Susie Yang. And I got This Time Next Year by Sophie Cousens, which I don't think this was on my fall most anticipated, but it was one that I had my eye on. It's about a woman and a man who were born at the same time roundabouts at the hospitals, but he's the New Year's baby. So he got all this great stuff. So like he's led a charmed life and she had, but their paths keep crossing, I guess.
Oh,
it seems cute. And then Memorial by Bryan Washington, which I had not heard about until after we did our episode, but then I was like, oh, this would have been on my most anticipated, and it sounds really great. It's about a gay couple who live together in Houston, and one of the guys is from Japan, and he has to go back to Osaka because his father is sick, I think, but his mother comes to live in Texas with his boyfriend who's Black, and like they start to bond. I don't know. It sounds good. So yeah, those were my books.
Is that fiction or nonfiction?
It's a novel. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
He wrote Lot, which I remember being a big book last year, but I did not get around to reading it. So, but yeah, I've heard great things about this author. So
interesting.
Yeah.
And Sanctuary was the 5th and final book on my fall TBR. So I'm over here, Janet, by myself.
Wow. How'd you do that?
Well, I haven't really been sleeping this week because existential dread.
Yeah.
So I've been reading, and I'm very excited to, as you guys start reading again, not read for a while.
Good for you.
But it was billed as The Craft Meets Practical Magic.
Ooh.
And yes. Or no. Big Little Lies meets Practical Magic, and then someone else said The Craft meets, I don't know, something else. It's on the back there. You'll see.
Now that you're talking about it, I do remember you talking about it. So okay, great.
I don't want to get any more into it because I know you like to go in as fresh as possible, but so fun.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I hope you like it, and you should loan it to Rachael next. So
yeah,
sounds great.
Okay, so we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to be talking with Stephanie Fowler, who wrote a book called Chasing Alice, which is a true crime novel. I don't want to give too much away because we want to hear about it from Stephanie, but I loved it. It was such an interesting read, and we're really excited to talk to her. And Kelly, you know Stephanie.
Yes, yeah. My high school classmate. So
yes, so should be a really interesting conversation. So stick around and we'll be back to talk to Stephanie.
And we are back, and we're joined by Stephanie Fowler, my high school classmate and true crime author, and also actual author. Hey, Steph.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Great.
Good. Yeah. Thank you for joining us.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. So, it's I've been listening to you guys, so it's fun to actually, go from, was it like long time listener, first time caller? I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So hi.
But this is your first nonfiction book, right? Because your first one was short stories about the area where we're from.
Yeah, so it was actually nonfiction too, but I probably, having gone back to look at that first run of short stories, I took a few more liberties than I did with Chasing Alice. So the first book was short stories all about the Eastern Shore, real people, real places, real events, real things that actually happened. But I repackaged them and kind of told them in my own way. But I was in college at the time, so I took while all the stories were true and a lot of the facts were true and a lot of the background was true, there were moments where I did take a little bit more creative license with those. But I did not want to do that with Chasing Alice, because I wanted this book to be, if there's something in there, I promise you I learned it somewhere else. So, either through photos or interviews or, or actually going places myself or having been there myself. So I definitely, while the first one is, nonfiction, like I said, did take a little bit more liberty because I was, just 21, 22 in college. And this one, it was really important to me to get the facts right. So this one is what I would consider more strictly nonfiction.
Right.
Nonfiction.
And for people who haven't read it yet, Chasing Alice is about our English teacher in high school, Mrs. Alice Davis. And just to alleviate any possible confusion, everyone else on this podcast will probably call her Alice. I feel like I might literally be struck down dead by lightning, so I will be calling her Mrs. Davis, because she was like a very sort of, a warm person, but also kept people at a remove. So calling her Alice, I just, very uncomfortable.
I think had I not spent so much time with people who just kept calling her Alice, if I had just written this from just a student's perspective, I'd probably be in the same boat. But, after I got through this a little bit, and I think after a while, like just the Mrs. Davis part kind of dropped away from me and she really just became Alice. So, I won't fault you for that there, Kelly.
I appreciate that. Thank you. But after we had both graduated, so 9 years ago, she went missing, and it was later discovered that she was murdered by her husband. And you wrote this amazing, well-researched, just absolute treasure of a book that I think will make everybody realize who she was and what we lost. And I just thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're welcome. It was certainly a labor of love. And, I think as a student of hers, as someone who developed a special relationship with her, I really found her to be a mentor in many ways. And, it was really important to me that other people get to know what we knew, and not just, a terrible newspaper headline or an awful Google search. That was one of the things that really spurred me on with the book was, every time I would mention her name, her murder became so synonymous. Like, oh, I think I heard something about that. Wasn't she murdered? Oh, I heard the husband did this, and it just bothered me that she was so closely connected to her worst day, and I think about my worst day, and I surely would not want that to be the first thing that people thought of, or that would be the closest thing connected to me. And I knew this other side of her. I knew this really important side of her. And I knew that, and I just wanted other people to know that too. So that was a big motivation for me and why I did this. And I hope that ultimately I've been successful in not sensationalizing it further, but really trying to present a picture of who she was and why she mattered.
You definitely did. I think the biggest thing I took away from reading the book and then also talking to Kelly is just what an impact she had on her students. And you even say in the book, it was like she knew what each individual student needed in certain moments. She knew when she needed to be tough on someone, or she knew when she needed to show a little bit of more care to help them along. And you talk about that and your experiences in the book with her in school. And so I definitely got that sense reading it. So I think you did an excellent job in showing who she was as a person. And I feel like now I know her too.
Good. And I think that's one of the great things about, the book is that it has a reach that, once I write it and, and it goes out into the world, it starts to have this reach and other people start to see it. And there's people that I have no idea who they are. And there are people who did not know Alice, but now have heard her story. And to me, I think that's just the tremendous power of, putting a book out into the world, is that it has real power to change. And
yeah,
and it's been pretty incredible to see that, and very heartwarming, and have people say, oh my gosh, I can see why you cared so much for her, and I can see why others cared so much for her, and I can see why this has been so tragic and why this was such a loss. And so that's been heartwarming to know that others got to see the sides of her that they otherwise wouldn't have known. So that's made me feel good about the project, because I haven't always felt good about this project, I'll be honest with you. But that part has been nice.
So what, I know that you had been writing it for a long time, and you kept like getting a bunch done and then kind of pulling back. So besides making sure that everybody knew more about her than just the horrible way that she died, what really motivated you to keep going?
Oh gosh, I think, a little bit of what I mentioned earlier, that, when people would mention her name to me, it was always like in tandem with the murder and with her disappearance. And I did feel this impulse to present another side, or present a fuller picture. I think I wanted to present a fuller picture of her. And I think the other thing is that she would not have wanted me to quit. I mean, I don't know that she would have wanted this book written. Like, I'll just be honest, I'm not entirely sure I believe that she would want me to have done this, but I think she was the kind of person that if you commit to something, you commit to it and you see it to the end. So there were several times when, I was working on it and I wanted to give up for a number of reasons. And I just felt like I started this, I need to see it through to the end. And so, and there were, and I think the other thing too is that there were people who wanted to know what happened, and there were people who wanted to have clarity on this. I hate the word closure, because I don't think that you ever really get, I don't think you ever really get closure on something like this when someone you love is murdered brutally. I don't know that closure is a thing you get, but I think having answers, or having facts, or at least knowing the full picture, I was hopeful that would provide some level, I don't want to say comfort, but at least kind of, because there were people that had heard other things that had happened, and at least knowing maybe those terrible, like something terrible happened, but maybe these other terrible rumor things didn't happen, maybe that was a comfort in some way. And I think the other part too is, there were people who did not know the impact she had on her students. And I always felt that was something important to put forward. I think teachers don't get all the credit they deserve. And I think, this is an opportunity for me to say, no, teachers matter. And this is why they matter, because I was going off the rails, and it was a teacher that, really kind of pulled me back and, helped be a great comfort to me, and really, was someone that encouraged me not only as a young writer, but just also as a young person who was in a really difficult time, and just, was there for me. And so I think there were times when I wanted to quit, because quitting is easy. I mean, let's be honest, quitting is easy. But there were all these other things that kind of kept itching at the back of my mind. And I was like, okay, I need to see this through. And I'm glad I did. But it was hard to slog through at times. And then sort of in the middle of that also, and I talk about it in the book, but my mom needed a kidney transplant. So I'd started writing the book, and then we had to do the kidney transplant. So I had to like time out, work and focus on that. And then I came back to the book, and then my wife and I got married. So of course, when you plan a wedding, you got to push pause on everything else. And then shortly after the wedding, about 2.5 months later, we were in a terrible accident, and my wife was really, really hurt, ended up at shock trauma. So that was a whole nother time where I had to kind of push pause on the book. So it might not have taken 6 years had some of those major life events not kind of popped up right in the middle. But, so it was a lot it was a lot in the last 6 years to make sure this kind of came to light.
Wow.
Yeah.
You do mention that she was a private person, but I think honestly, the fact that so much of the end of her life was news, I think she would be really happy and relieved for people to know, like,
right,
oh, there was this other stuff too. She wasn't like a teacher who got murdered, or I mean, she wasn't just a teacher who got murdered. Like, she was a sister and a friend and a stepmom, and you know, all these other amazing things. Like, she wasn't like one two-dimensional thing. She was a whole person.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that I really had to kind of come to terms with myself, because as a, you know, teenager, you know, very angsty poetry writing teenager in high school, you know, I saw her, and to me, she was perfect. She was perfect in every way. She was perfectly presentable every day. Her hair was perfect. Everything was perfect. She knew the lessons inside out, upside down, backwards and forwards. And because she was so kind to me, you know, I had basically stuck her up on this pedestal and just put a spotlight on her and was like, she has it all together. And then, you know, going through learning about her and recognizing that she wasn't perfect, and that putting her up on that pedestal was really not doing her any good. She was more complicated. We're all complicated. You know, by the time we get to, you know, the age we are now and the age she was, you know, we all have come through with scars and baggage, and, you know, have run the whole gamut of life experiences. And so that was one of the things, like, kind of taking her off of that pedestal and learning who she was as a woman. You know, she had fallen in love, she had made mistakes, she had worked hard, she had had friends, she had lost friends, she had, you know, family fights with her sisters. There was like she was a whole person. She just wasn't this like idealized version of perfection that I had stuck up on a pedestal. She was a real actual human. And so there were times where in the beginning, when I started to learn, like when I learned that she loved martinis, I mean, that really like sat me back on my head. I was like, Miss Davis, like martinis, like, you know, like, and so then learning more and more, and then, you know, taking her off of that pedestal and letting her be who she was and finding that out. And I feel like I came to even respect her more, knowing that she had flaws and that she wasn't perfect. And I think I came to a place where, you know, I think I learned to love her more.
The scene in the book where I feel like it just says so much about who she is as a person is at the end, near the end, where she's talking to her neighbors and she has new shoes on, and they remark upon it because for so long she didn't replace her shoes, which needed to be replaced. So she wasn't thinking about herself or, you know, prioritizing herself, but she in that moment was ready for a new chapter. And I feel like, yeah, you mentioned that she was a private person, but I feel like in this book you've given her, you know, that next chapter for her that she clearly was looking for. So I think she'd be happy.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think that, and I say kind of early on in the book that, you know, she was a deeply private person. And I think being so deeply private did not help prevent her from ending up where she was. But, you know, I do think there is value in seeing her in the full light of day. And I think that, you know, in telling her story, letting her be more than just a headline, and letting her be all the things that she was, good, bad, ugly, whatever, you know, just letting her be all those things. And then hopefully, you know, that story resonating with other readers, I think is something that I certainly hope will happen. And I've actually had 2 instances where women have read this book and, you know, passed the book on to women who are in bad relationships, women who are in relationships with men who are very similar to Jess Davis. And they have said, you know, one lady reached out to me and she said, you know, I have a friend who I grew up with, you know, in Maryland. We were neighbors, and there was this, you know, we always used to joke that one day she was going to end up on 48 Hours or Dateline. And she said, in reading your book, I recognize that that's not a joke, and I'm just going to send her this book because she needs to read this. And there was another lady who contacted me and said she was sending it to her sister because her sister was in a pretty bad relationship. And she said, I don't know, she might not speak to me after I send her this book, but she needs to see this. And so there's that other, you know, part where there has been this hope that I have nursed kind of deep down in my heart that someone might read this book and say, oh my gosh, I recognize these warning signs of his behavior in someone I love. And, you know, didn't end well for Alice. You know, this is real. And, you know, it's real life. It's real people. These are real consequences. So I was very heartened by knowing that the book had been moved forward to at least 2 women. I will probably never know how many in total, and that's fine. But I know of at least 2 women who've received the book as like a, hey, might want to check this,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's also been, and I've always said, if Alice's death could have a chance to save a life, or better a life than all of the angst I went through to write it, and I think all the cringe she may feel wherever she is, knowing that I did write it, may be assuaged by knowing that. So,
Yeah.
You also talked to so many people, her sisters, I know, and her friends, and her stepdaughter. I know the stepdaughter really liked the book. Has anyone else said anything?
oh gosh, yeah. That's been the interesting thing. There has been a real outpouring from people who have read the book. Several of the teachers that we had, I'll say it in terms, so Mrs. Collins, Ann Collins, who I interviewed for the book. I mean, she is, Kelly, she was not exactly one to heap on praise. And I certainly didn't get this kind of praise in her classroom. But she has definitely reached out and told me, how much she appreciated it and how much she enjoyed it and how much of a good job she thought I did. And recently I heard from Mrs. Cindy Bennett, who I also interviewed for the book. She and I had a really long Facebook exchange over it. She was pretty overwhelmed, and she had a lot of positive things to say. I think one of the things is because I talked to so many people from different facets of her life, I think people who knew her as a teacher were learning things from other people. And so like her childhood best friend was learning something. So I think one of the common themes is that people who knew her were all learning something new about her. Because, I talked to her neighbors, I talked to her sister, I talked to his sister, his daughter / her stepdaughter, other teachers, other students, people in law enforcement, detectives. I mean, if anybody sat still for more than a second and knew anything about her, I'd be like, hey, so I think that was one of the things that people were learning something new. And, and so a lot of folks have reached out. The commentary has always been very positive. I've been very grateful for the positive feedback. And one of the things that I've really heard is that, the goals that I set out for myself as a writer when I wanted to write this book, it really seems like, based on the feedback I'm getting, like that I sort of met those goals that I wanted to hit. And, the lady who was her best friend, childhood best friend, she remarked about it. And so it's been really nice to hear the feedback, because, at the end of the day, people will say, oh, I read your book, and I'm like, oh, I hoped you liked it. And then there's always this second thought in my head, like, this is a terrible story. This is a hard story. This is not a happy story. This is not a story that you put the book down and you go, that was fantastic, in terms of like, it's a sad story. But I have always felt that it's an important story to tell. And so I've always been I've been trying to figure out what to say when people say, oh, I'm going to buy your book, or, oh, I just bought your book. And it's like, I want to say, I hope you like it. But then I'm like, I don't know if that's the right thing to say, because I don't, so again, I'm still sort of trying to work through some of the things that I feel and think about.
That's the thing about true crime. Like, we are fascinated by it. I think in books and there's TV shows and podcasts galore. I think people really, there's something about it that we want to learn more about, these terrible things that happen. And yeah, they are terrible stories, but there's something about it that is like engrossing, I think, for people.
Yeah, I sort of tried to comment on that up front in the book, that, what I did not want to do with this book is to be sensational.
Right.
I did not want it to be like, oh, let's look at all these gory details. Let's expose all these secrets. Like, I didn't want it to be that kind of project. And I certainly that it didn't, because I really wanted the focus to be on her, who she was, what she mattered, how she, mattered to us, what was her legacy, what was her impact on people. Yes, there was a murder, so I have to deal with that component, but I don't necessarily want that component to be, honestly, without that component, there is no book. And what I would give to have no book and to know that she was just out there with her cats and, reading and having a martini. But that's not where we are. So how do I reconcile talking about a terrible, brutal murder with also wanting to have the sensitivity of the people who are going to read this are people who loved her. These are people who cared about her. These are people who knew her. These are people that, learning about some of these things is going to be hard. I mean, when I talked to her sister, Barry, a couple of weeks ago, she said it was hard. It was hard for them. And, and I wanted to make sure that I approached the material with a sensitivity to that, and to make sure that I was approaching the book with respect, and to do it in a way that I hoped would be an honor to her, and not something that people would read and go, that was really unnecessary,
yeah,
that was important. So hopefully I hit that. Well, I guess time will be the ultimate judge. So
it definitely was a tribute to her, I think. Yeah.
Well, I wanted it to be, that was she mattered so much to me. I mean, she's, a part of why I'm a writer. And when I do sit down to write, frequently, like I think I even say in the book, anytime like I write a sentence and I look at it, I'm like, that's passive voice. Like immediately I'm like, is there a better way that I can say it? And I'm like, and then sometimes like I have these battles. I'm like, no, I meant to say it that way, and I'm going to say it that way. And then I can just hear this, sort of in the back of my head, so, there are parts of her that, I think I talk about when I was working on my senior thesis, it was so important for me to impress her. And every time I turn in a draft, she'd just like bleed all over it with a red pen. And, and I would keep trying and I'd keep trying. And I feel like that was a lesson that she taught me, was that, just because you're like, not bad at it. You're not bad at this writing thing doesn't mean that you should rest on your laurels. You can always push yourself to do better. And can you write the sentence a better way? Can you find a stronger point to make? Can you not cheat and be lazy and I'll just do this and skate by? So, I feel like there were a lot of lessons that maybe at the time in her classroom, I didn't really recognize were like real lessons so much as they were like just a technical lesson. But having, decades to think on it and to think on her, they were really more life lessons too, not just writing lessons. And I think, she had a way of delivering her lessons where it wasn't like she was, shoving it right in your face so much as it was like this like subtle way. And then you kind of picked it up and you're like, oh, I did learn that. That's right. So, she was pretty fantastic about, she was just a natural teacher, and she was, and she was just a naturally sensitive person. And, her empathetic nature certainly was something that I desperately needed at that time. And she was able to give it to me. So, yeah, there's that.
I feel like after everything that happened, I really only thought about her in relationship to the murder and everything. And then the only other thing I really thought about when I was a senior and in her class, that was the year my dad died. And I was not doing super great emotionally. And this is my favorite story. So I'm in her class and just bone weary, right? Just done with everything. And I'm awake, but I have my head down because it's like the kind of emotional exhaustion where your head is like 20,000 pounds and you're like, I can't. So I have my head down and she's like, if you were a horse, they would shoot you. And when I tell people that story, they're like, oh my God, what a bitch. And I'm like, no, that was exactly what I needed, because, she knew what was going on and she wasn't, she wasn't mean, but her attitude was very much, you're here and you're going to work and we're going to work. And, have your stupid head up, Kelly, or they would shoot you if you were a horse.
Yeah, she was pretty great that way. I mean, she was, you just could not skate in her class, and I was going through, sort of a similar situation with the illness of a parent that year, and it was really sort of taxing me. And, I started to try to blow some projects off, and she was like, absolutely not, and she, just because she knew that I was having a difficult time, that was like, okay, but that's no reason to not do the work. You have to do the work. And so, I think that was another important lesson that, I just kind of took away, is like, you work because of the heartache. You work through the heartache, and you work because of the heartache, and you just keep going, because you just can't like lay down and quit, right? That's not a thing you can do. It certainly wasn't a thing you could do in her classroom. So, I think that, years later, looking at that, even though I kind of blew off that assignment that I talk about in the book, she was like, okay, I understand why you blew it off today, but you will have this, this essay ready. And I was like, oh, all right. And, but knowing that she was there, and knowing that I had a safe place to go, and knowing that I had someone who was listening to me, and knowing that I had a place where I could kind of get out all that stuff. And then once I got it out, I was like, okay, now what do I have to do? It kind of emptied out the head and said, I got all the like the stuff that was kind of banging around in there, got it out. And then it was like, okay, all right, now what do I need to do to be successful and get through this year? And I don't think without her, I would have been nearly as successful as I was. I was heading into some pretty tough stuff. And, the fact that she saw it and helped and connected with me was just something that I just never forgot. And one of the things that was always hard for me was, it was always hard for me to reconcile the kind, sweet, loving, intelligent, bright, inspirational, nurturing person that she was, with this brutal, senseless end. And I still can't reconcile that. Even after spending 6 years writing a book, I still can't reconcile those two things. And I imagine I never will reconcile those two things. But I feel like through the process of doing all the interviews, looking at all the police records, going through the autopsy records, going through crime scene photos, going through old yearbooks, going through all of the things that I did over the past 6 years, I do feel like it brought me to a place of understanding and, again, no, not closure, but able to accept what happened, and to be able to come from a place of, I don't like it, but this is what happened. And to really try to say, what now? Like what, like when something like this happens, a lot of the 48 hours or Datelines or true crime things, they're just like, tell you about the murder and done. Right. But for people who have lost someone to a violent act like that, it doesn't end at the commercial break. There is no commercial break. You go on, and her sisters have had to go on without her, and her stepdaughter has had to go on, and her friends have had to go on, our fellow teachers have had to go on without her. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And that, the sense of like, what remains, what is left for us, and how do we move forward, and how do we honor the memory, and those sorts of things. And I think that was something that was important for me to put forward in this book, because it was certainly something I struggled with. So I felt like if I'm struggling it, and I only knew her for this sort of like this narrow window of time, then I'm sure that other people who knew her for a much bigger window also struggles. And so if I could answer something that I felt I could be of use, if I can be of use, then that would be an honor to, my memory of her. So
I loved that you described her classroom, because I had completely forgotten those posters. And she had all these posters in her classroom, right? And she had like an old school Revenge of the Jedi poster, which is apparently what it was called. And she somehow had a one sheet of it before they changed it to Return of the Jedi. And she had a Beatlemania, This Is the Year That Was. And when you mentioned that, I was like, oh my God, because I had forgotten. And I really feel like I I got her back. And I mean, I imagine that's how her family and friends and coworkers felt. Cause I mean, yeah, like I knew her in this very short, tiny way. And they, you know, they lost in a lot of ways, like so much more. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Revenge of the Jedi poster, because when I had so I did a first draft and I did a second draft. And I remember, and I had a couple of beta readers. I had 5 beta readers who were like really good writer friends of mine who I knew I could trust to tell me what was wrong. Like, fine, you can tell me what you like about it, but tell me where I'm making mistakes. Tell me where I'm losing the reader. Tell me where something's not clear, or whatever. So there was a friend of mine who's kind of a big geek, and he was like, actually, this is Return of the Jedi. And then I had to be like, no, well, actually, sir, it was Revenge. And I actually had, and it was interesting because in my years of collections of, like yearbooks and all that kind of stuff, I've had a picture of my class with her. So it was Amy Yanks, who was the like our student teacher that year. I'm sorry, my dog doing a hi, Nemo. Okay.
My cat's meowing in response now.
Oh gosh, yeah. Hi, no, please, maybe take that somewhere else. So I had a picture of the whole class, and yeah, hi. Okay, I'm so sorry. So I had this whole picture of our class, and I could actually see all the posters that you mentioned, Kelly. The Procrastinator's Creed. There was actually like a calendar on the wall, and then I saw that it said Revenge of the Jedi on that poster. So I actually took that to my friend and was like, I'm right here. So I actually had to kind of like prove the guy right. But in terms of bringing her back to people, that was one of the things that some other people had said that, in reading the book, they had a lot of nostalgia, whether they were Parkside students who remembered the teachers or the layout or, some of the references, that I made in there, or they were people from Salisbury who remembered, Don's Belladonna or the Flying Club or, the paddock in the Ocean City area. So there were people who kind of read the book and they were like, oh, I remember these things that are gone now. And so there was like, Mr. Curly's, the restaurant, so there were people who, definitely had this sense of nostalgia. And so I think that was kind of a cool piece. And I've had other people say that they felt like, I kind of brought her back for them. But I think, and what I hope is that, by giving people kind of a biography almost, I wouldn't want to call it an exact biography, but sort of at least kind of an overall profile of who she was from birth to the end. Hopefully in knowing that like it, one of the things when I was doing interviews was I could see people going back and like remembering, and then I'd always say to people after the interview, like, hey, if this interview has kind of jogged your memory in some way, like please call me or send me an email or follow up with me, and then that way we keep talking. And invariably people would reach back and say, after I got in my car after talking to you, I remember this other thing. And so it was almost like people were kind of going back in their own memories, kind of, chasing her back in their own minds about things that they did with her or things that she said or things they remembered or even just the way they felt about her. And so I think in a lot of ways, the interview process kind of jogged some of that. And then here I was kind of like, collecting all of those stories, collecting all that data and trying to present it in this book. I think some people felt that, they got a fuller sense and a fuller picture, and hopefully in some way there are other people, like you, Kelly, that say, oh, I feel like I got her back, So, I think that's certainly, it certainly touches my heart to think that I could do that for people. So.
Well, I think you definitely did. And I think that after reading this book, I know Alice well enough to know she wouldn't want you to stop writing. So do you have another project in the works?
Yes, actually. So I'm working on, actually before Alice was murdered, I was working on kind of a follow-up to my first book, which was all a collection of short stories about the Eastern Shore. And so I had started working on another collection of short stories about the Eastern Shore. Again, real people, real places, real events, real stuff that actually happened. And so I started working on that, and then she was murdered. So then I became very quickly, I was like, okay, that goes to the way back burner. I'm going to work on this story. And then it took me 6 years. And so now I'm actually going back to that first collection of short stories and starting to work on some of those again. And actually the story that I'm working on now I may end up putting the collection of short stories on hold again, because the story that I'm working on now has turned out to be incredibly interesting and pretty complex. It's about, just real quickly, it's about a double homicide in Salisbury in 1968. A prisoner in the Salisbury jail had his girlfriend smuggle in a gun in a box of candy, and he shot and killed the jailer. And as he was escaping the jail, he also shot and killed the sheriff. So to Bob Marley's, I shot the sheriff, but I didn't shoot the deputy. This guy shot the sheriff and the jailer. Yeah. So, and what was so
also just like, wow, you all let a gun be smuggled in with the candy. You didn't check the candy, like really?
Yeah, it was, so to your point, which is pretty interesting, was that morning. So this happened at like 10 o'clock at night on Sunday, December 8th, 1968. So Sunday morning, the newspaper comes out, and I think I shared a picture of this with you, Kelly, but the Sunday morning newspaper comes out, and it is a headline with Sheriff Graham talking about how safe and secure his jail is.
Oh.
Yeah. And there he is, in his big cowboy hat, talking about how safe and secure his jail is. And what was happening was there had been a series of articles by some Western Shore newspapers saying how the Eastern Shore jails were really subpar. They treated prisoners inhumanely. They didn't get enough food, water, all that kind of stuff. And so they had written a series of exposés. Well, this Sunday morning article was basically Sheriff Graham sort of replying to that and sort of saying, no, our jails are safe, our jails are secure. And then at 10 o'clock that night, a prisoner had shot and killed him and made his way out of the jail.
Wow.
But and that's the thing, and this is, I guess, why I write nonfiction, is because if I wrote a story where the newspaper comes out with the sheriff saying how safe and secure his jail is, and then I killed that same sheriff that same night, people would say, oh, that's not believable. You gotta give more time than that, But no, this actually happened. And, the irony of that was just, how can I resist it? I can't. So,
talk about Chekhov's gun, right?
Yeah, maybe if the box of candy is like pretty heavy and it rattles a little, like maybe open it up, so that
is this caramels?
Yeah, Russell Stover's really doing some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
What's happening. So it's been an interesting story to work on and to write on. And so initially I just thought I would do like a short story about it. But as I'm digging into it, I have found it's just gotten even more interesting and more complex. So I may end up actually making this story my next book. Yeah. But I'm doing all my research now and kind of fleshing it out. So we'll see how that turns out. But my next project will be either this as a book or this as a series, as a story in a series of short stories. Collection. Yeah.
And obviously 2020 has been quite a year, and has the pandemic and just 2020 in general, has your writing life changed at all? Have you changed the way that you write, or how often you're writing? Or
I think I am an extrovert, and so this 2020 stuff, being stuck in the house, has because I've been working from home since mid-March with no foreseeable change in that in the future. But one thing that, has been just like, I don't sit still very well. So even though I'm stuck in the house, it's like, like I learned to cook. And so like my writing, I'm just, and now that I think the other part too is now that writing Alice is kind of over, and that was so hard for me, and I felt like I was slogging through it. not this past summer, but the summer before, my wife Patty said, I think you just need to finish this because it's taking away your love of writing, because you know, I've always loved to write, and it's always been something that kind of helped me kind of process like my experiences and how I felt about things. And then every time I was sitting down because she was gone. And it was like the thing that I loved to do, and the thing that was always my favorite form of self-expression was kind of under this very heavy cloak, you know, and I just felt weighed down by that. But now that project's over, now I'm finding myself like excited again and excited to sit down and write. And then finding this, you know, in kind of going back to this story about, you know, Sheriff Graham and all of that, like I've kind of found myself reinvigorated. So even though like I'm not really out talking to people and being like, you know, the you know, the ADD extrovert that I am, I have just like focused all of that like on my writing. So, and you know, it keeps me out of my wife's hair, which she's probably very happy for. So, you know, so 2020 has definitely been, I mean, the pandemic's been awful, and I feel awful for, you know, all the people that have suffered through that. On a personal note, it hasn't been that bad because I've had some, you know, I've been able to really focus on writing and some other things. So I feel like I've made some pretty good strides, you know, published Alice during this period and started working on a new project. So being stuck inside has not been the worst thing for me, especially for my writing. It's definitely made me, you know, I think I've been a bit more productive in the pandemic than I would have been otherwise. So I guess there's that.
It's definitely a silver lining.
Yeah, for sure.
And we always ask our guests to recommend a book, since our podcast is What You Should Read. So do you have a book recommendation for us? What should we read?
You know, interesting. So the book that I'm reading now, it's kind of an interesting little story. So right now I'm reading Keeping On by Gemma Hoskins, who was, if you remember, The Keepers. It was a Netflix documentary about the murderer sister, Kathy Sesnick. So it's been interesting. After I published Alice, Gemma Hoskins, who actually lives in Ocean City, I live just outside of Fenwick Island. She actually reached out to me and was like, hi, you don't know me, but I was on The Keepers. And I was like, actually, I was super into that. So I do know you. And I looked you up on Facebook, but I didn't Facebook friend you because that was being weird. So I definitely practiced some self-restraint, didn't fangirl. And then she actually reached out to me and was like, hey, you know, I saw this article about you wrote about your teacher who was murdered. You know, Kathy Sesnick, you know, Sister Kathy was my high school English teacher. I think we have some things in common. Let's talk. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I can get with that. So I've met her a couple times, and, you know, she's really a fantastic lady. And so she has written kind of like my memoir biography kind of vibe to it. And it's about her experiences with The Keepers, the Netflix show, and then how she kind of got to be who she is, and why that has become a pursuit and passion of hers. So I've been reading that book, and so that's been a kind of neat to have that kind of connection with someone who I kind of watched on TV in a documentary, and then have now kind of developed like a little bit of a kinship with. And so that's actually what I'm reading right now. I'm into part 3, where we get more into The Keepers. And some of the stuff that happened with that show. So that is what I'm reading.
I'll have to check that out. I did watch that documentary. So it was wild.
it is wild. And you know, if you watch that documentary and you look at Gemma, I mean, when you meet her in person, she is exactly as is on camera. I mean, she's kind of a badass. So it's been pretty cool to kind of develop a kinship with her. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you guys have any other questions or any that we missed? Kelly, you did?
Is there an Alice story that didn't make it into the book? And I said Alice.
You did.
You did. Oh my gosh, let me think. Was there something? You know, there were some things that I did learn, but I felt that they would be sort of embarrassing for her. So I left them out because I also felt like they didn't serve the narrative. But is there something that I learned that I didn't? Well, there was one story about me in her classroom that I didn't put in the book, which is, actually there's 2 things that I learned. So one was, there was a time when I was in a classroom, and apparently I didn't remember this, but one of our fellow students said, was chewing gum, and that was like a big thing. And she was like, Stephanie, go spit out your gum. So the trash can was empty. So when I spit out this huge hunk of gum, apparently it hit with this, like, landed like a rock in the trash can in a quiet classroom. And it was like this thunk, like, and she apparently, and I don't remember this, but the other student did say, apparently she snapped her head up and she said, what are you chewing on, lead? And, and I was like, nah. But and cat lovers will love this part. So in the book, I wrote that she had 5 cats, and I wrote in the book that they were all euthanized and cremated and buried with her. Something I learned after the fact was 2 of the cats were not euthanized. 2 of the cats were actually adopted out. Oh. And there were 3 cats. There were several that she had that she was that were old, and she had been approaching that, like, do I not? When is the right time to kind of let them go? But there were 2 cats that were younger that were not in bad health, and they were both adopted out to fellow teachers. And in fact, one of the cats is still alive today. Aww. His name is Teddy, and he is a super cute orange marmalade with clearly a lot of attitude. The guy who owns him sent me a picture, and he's just kind of like rocked back on his sofa, kind of like looking over his shoulder. And it's just like if he's like serving some looks in that little photo. But so Teddy, one of her cats is still alive and still kicking, and and so that was something that I learned kind of after the fact of, that I'm very much glad that I got wrong. So yeah. So
because this wasn't that long ago, now that I'm thinking about it. I read this book and I am thinking about it as if it happened decades ago, but it was what, 5 or 6, 7 years ago?
9 years ago.
9 years ago. Okay.
So yeah. So 9 years ago. And I understand cats can live to be like 11 billion years old.
Yeah.
So Teddy's got a go.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Stephanie. This was such a great conversation, and so glad you wrote the book.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for having me and letting me talk about Alice and continuing to share her with other people.
Oh, and one more thing about your book is that listeners to the podcast, Kelly is in the book. So if you read the book, you will come across a Kelly Hager. So check it out.
Yeah. She was one of the things. She was like, yeah, you can put me in this book, but don't make me look stupid. And I was like, whoa, okay, yeah, got it, no problem. So when I got the book done, I was like, so how did you, she was, because I was like, if I tick off Kelly Hager, that's it. I just might as well quit the book. Just like close down my social media. That's it.
Yeah.
So, but apparently I passed the Kelly Hager test, so that means a lot.
You made me look so smart and also so fancy. Like there's a little bit of a, like her students as legacy, and I sound like the most important person in the entire world. So I don't know who you're describing, but I hope to meet her someday.
Aww. Yeah, I can hook you up. I think I'm friends with her on Facebook, so I'll hook you up.
It was such a neat surprise as I was reading. I was like, Kelly? Oh.
Yeah, I remember that conversation, and and I remember talking with you about Alice and doing that interview, and we both got crying. Like all of a sudden we were talking, and the next thing I know, like Kelly's voice breaks, and then I'm crying, and I was like, okay,
I'm sorry.
But I think it's one of those things we just like connected and just kind of need to kind of get that out, and then we could kind of move on with the interview. So, but I was like, once your voice broke, I was like, well, that's it, I'm done.
Aww.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it just speaks to how special she was to us, and that all these years later, we can still get emotional about it and laugh too.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks again for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, ladies.
Yeah. All right, and that's our show. Thanks again to Stephanie Fowler for joining us. You can follow us on social media at WYSR_podcast on Instagram and on Twitter. You can email us at whatyoushouldreadpodcast@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Goodreads at What You Should Read Podcast, where we post a bookshelf for every episode and list the books that we talk about. So, be sure to find us, and thanks for listening. Give us a review and a rating wherever you're listening. We really appreciate it.
And now you know what you should read.
You're welcome.